who's here. Um, Definitely a wonderful day to be watching YouTube because you want to be outside. Um, yeah, and so again, we're kind of flip flopping. I mean, in reality, it probably doesn't feel totally out of place, but realistically, before we talk about Mary, explicitly, it's good to understand, well, why did Mary give birth in the first place? And so, yeah, we'll backtrack a little bit, because in the Creed we hear that through the Holy Spirit Jesus was born of the Virgin Mary, and so later on we hear another line about Mary, but being born of the Virgin Mary. Before we talk about Mary, we need to understand that Jesus was born. That this is that God was became a human. And so this is, I think, that the biggest struggle for any Christian is, I mean, the nice thing for people who didn't grow up Christian or maybe didn't grow up too religious, these ideas can seem absolutely astounding, but for like the born and raised Christians, like, yeah, Jesus came as a little baby and then he saved the world and forgave of our sins. And then it's like, do you understand the words that you're saying? Like, this is unbelievable. And we're just kind of like, and so every Sunday we get to say the creed. And so hopefully that's an opportunity for us to reflect on um, the incredible nature of everything we believe. And so at the center of that, of course, is Jesus. And Jesus uh, is God, is the God man, is God who became man. And so at that time, it was an idea tossed around, but at that time, it was a fresh idea, pretty much, this crazy reality that God could become man. But today, now, it should be still similarly astounding. So, firstly, is the incarnation. Um, what does incarnation mean? Any idea? Good. So, um, yeah, I guess you're probably supposed to be stumped. You don't know Latin or Catholic theology very much. So, incarnation is the enfleshment. So, carne is meat or flesh, uh, and so incarnation is the flesh becoming into existence. And so the enfleshment of God, that's what the incarnation is. And so when we talk about the incarnation, it's not nice carne asada outside of the drive through. It is God who became flesh and entered the world. And so again, when we think about this idea of incarnation, um, we can be like, okay, well, yeah, of course, God was supposed to become man, and then God was supposed to become, it'd be Jesus and save the world and all that stuff. Um, but I don't know if any of you like to kind of get deep or metaphysical. Um, but if you really strip away all of our preconceptions, all of our ideas of religion, and just think of what it means to be human, and what it means to have a God. Looking at especially this picture, this just looks like a mom and a cute baby. And to imagine that that little adorable thing that can't walk, can't talk, can't do anything besides maybe a little bit of babbling, uh, and of course all the diaper stuff. That baby is God. Like, we should just soak that in. And that, when we look at pictures of Jesus, we're like, okay, well, that guy looks like a pretty strapping, a competent guy who could speak eloquently. Um, but especially when we see Jesus as a baby, and we're like, that's God. Like, that is crazy. And so I guess the beautiful thing is that it prepares us for um, the Eucharist, because that's even crazier of a leap, that we believe God uh, can transform bread into God's presence. Similarly, God can become in the presence of a baby, or become a baby. Um, and so, like, firstly, so yes, let's say we take away all of our Christian preconceptions. We just imagine that we're people in the world, and as people, throughout all of history, we probably should believe in a God. Okay, so all history, people believe in God or gods, or crazy Greek epics and all this stuff. Um, and so, our if we're humans and God's up there, yeah, sometimes like the Greeks and things like that, they just made the gods to be like people. Like, okay, these gods are like people, but they're greater than us and all this stuff. Um, but then the other idea of gods is that um, God is like the sun, like something so powerful, so incredible, um, that could, like, if we got too close, it would absolutely consume us. And so that's the idea that the Jewish people had. This idea that God is this profound, totally, beyond us, like greater than all existence. Um, that's the Jewish idea of God. And so, to imagine that God would become again a human, that is pretty, just totally shatters the Jewish mind. But I guess before Jesus, we saw that um, God wasn't like a vindictive, cold, distant God. All throughout Christian history, God was present among God's people. So God walked His people through the desert. God appeared in different ways to Moses and to the prophets. God in many ways was gentle and loving, and so the incarnation, again, was a huge leap um, in terms of that crazy, astounding, otherworldly God. But at the same time, God kind of planted some seeds in terms of God who wants to be with us. Okay, now the fun stuff. So we're gonna go from baby Jesus, Jewish times, things like that, to these guys. So all of you know this guy to some degree. He's a saint, and he's actually very connected to the season of Christmas in our culture. Saint Nicholas. Does anybody know that Saint Nicholas slapped another bishop? Yeah. So Saint Nicholas. So at the Council of Nicaea, Saint Nicholas was there, and he was really kind of advocating for the nature of Jesus. That Jesus is God, 100% God, 100% man. Somehow that worked out together. But this guy is Arius, and Arius was like, all right, Jesus wasn't really God. He was just a dude that God was like, all right, I'll let you kind of do some stuff. And so St. Nicholas got so heated about the truth of who God was that he slapped Arius in the face. And then Arius got excommunicated from the church. And then the council kind of defined more concretely the nature of Jesus. And so in the early church, the crazy thing is that this is the Council of Nicaea that brought all of these bishops together to hash things out. And I think this might be Arius. It's kind of sad. Like, come on, guys, believe me. So there were a lot. Well, there's multiple ecumenical councils, and even before that, there's a couple other councils. So an ecumenical council is a council that brings all the bishops together that can make it, so that they could hash out very uh, important topics for the church. And so, and then there's some other smaller councils where a couple bishops got together to hash things out. But in the first like 500 years of the church, maybe 400 years of the church, um, they had all these councils just to understand who Jesus was. Like just I mean, like obviously we had the scripture and we had all this stuff, but like to like theologically hash out like who is Jesus. And so again, people were slapped, people were kicked out of the church, a lot of probably yelling and arguments and bad blood, and people some bishops left the church, and total a lot of chaos. And so the question is, why did all of this hubbub happen just to define who Jesus was? Why is this such an important aspect of our faith? And so here's a little breakdown of what's going on. So these are just two versions of heresies, and then these are the first three ecumenical councils that were had. And so one extreme heresy is Jesus was only a guy, and then like God filled him to let him do his stuff. And then these two other heresies, Docetism and Adoptionism, asserted that Jesus was only God, and then kind of like put it like a Spider-Man costume on, like, I'm a human, and so these are two heresies, because as human beings, 100% God, 100% human, fused into total unity, doesn't, like, it's so much harder to try to defend that. So it's like, okay, well, let's just try to let's dumb this down so it's a little bit more understandable. And so these were very attractive heresies, and a heresy is, a non-traditional belief of the church. These are such attractive heresies because they could make a little bit more sense in the human mind. They weren't as mysterious. They weren't as absurd. But the reality is that in our faith, that our faith is mysterious. Our faith is beyond human comprehension. And so these bishops really wanted to hash out and concretize the fact that Jesus is truly what we say he is, 100% God, 100% human, and that's essential to all the other claims that we have in our Christian faith. And so we'll get into that. But anyway, so all of these councils, so like you think about early Christianity, and there was a lot of things that they had to deal with. They had to deal with them being killed all the time by non-Christians who didn't like them. They had to figure out how to structure themselves, with bishops and priests and deacons. They had to figure out how to live out the words of Jesus, so care for the poor and the widow and the orphan. Love your brother and sister, form a community, uphold the weak and the lowly, things like that. But all of these councils actually didn't really address any daily issues. They didn't address, the everyday problems of like, oh, what should we do with communion? Like, how should we receive communion and all this stuff? Or like, should we set up schools and hospitals, or should we, all of these are actually just incredibly. If you look back at these documents, you're like, this is boring theology. But again, it's the groundwork of what we believe. And so we're going to get into why particularly these ideas these or this idea of the incarnation is so important. And so this is St. Thomas Aquinas. So, do you know who St. Thomas Aquinas' teacher was? He St. Albert, yeah. So St. Albert the Great was like the smartest man of his time, and they were all Dominicans, and so my name's Dominic, so it's kind of fun. I'm definitely not smart enough to be a Dominican, but I like St. Dominic and the other guys. So St. Albert taught St. Thomas Aquinas, and St. Thomas Aquinas he basically, I think there's like a 3-volume set of his, one of his writings. There's just one of his books that's 3 volumes that kind of goes through. It was like the early catechism. So, but he would deal with every question. And so one question he, of course, had to deal with was, why did God become man? He dealt with a lot of other nitty-gritty theological topics, but this was one of them. And I think he came up with like 13 reasons. So I just picked 5 of them because 5's a nice number, and we don't need to go through that many. 13, it's an attractive number to me, but it's not 12, which is better. Yeah, 13 has no theological significance. Sorry. All right, so no, I like it. I used to wear 13. I liked wearing 13 for sports. So I'm partial, but it's not too biblical. Okay, so first one is to free human nature from sin so that we could be perfectly happy. So, again, if we just go back to the origins of things, you strip away a lot of our Christian ideas. Well, this is Christian, but we go back to the beginning of the Bible and take away any other preconceived notions we have. The first thing we have are 2 people. Who are they? Adam and Eve, yeah. And so I could have found a better picture, but I was running out of time, honestly. But it is nice. Adam and Eve. I just want to, most pictures of Adam and Eve are like them getting sent out of the garden. And I'm like, well, I'm not going for that. But the first thing, I guess we're just brushing up on the stuff we've already learned, is that God made humanity to be in total union with Him and to live happily ever after. And so that was a point of Adam and Eve, and for Adam and Eve's, that was a plan for Adam and Eve's progeny, but of course they messed it up, and so they went to the tree and ate the fruit by the serpent, and so this is the state that God has always desired us to be in, and so once the fruit was eaten, the whole plan of Jesus kind of started. So Jesus, and I think I mentioned this a while ago in one of my other talks, but if Adam and Eve didn't sin, Jesus would have always been, because it's Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and they always existed with one another eternally. But Jesus would not, the second person of the Trinity, would not really have needed to become a human. I mean, there's debate about that, but really, Jesus became human so that He could free us from sin. And so if Adam and Eve never sinned, they probably could have been revealed, God could have revealed to them the essence of God in terms of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, but in a different way. And so Jesus came to God became man primarily because of this whole thing with Adam and Eve. Secondly, is that only a God-man was able to both restore human nature and satisfy divine justice against sin. And so Arian was wrong, because Arian. What did Arian say? I remember. the Arian heresy. Just a guy, yeah, exactly. So Jesus was just a guy, and so um, the idea is that he was like, oh well, Jesus is just a guy, but God gave him special powers, and he could have done the things. But the reality is that um, we by ourselves cannot, even with the endless grace of God, we cannot save ourselves. And so no human being is able to save himself, no matter how much grace God gives them. God is the only one that can that has the power to remove the stain of sin and to remove the big uh, stone in the way of us in heaven. And so I was really racking my brain for analogies, and so I came up with two analogies. One of them is, um, yeah. So let's say let's just look at life on Earth as just a basketball game, or like any sports game. And so, um, in order for the team to win, so let's say the our team's playing, and then the star player breaks his knee, and then is out. And so you're like, oh shoot, we don't have a star player, and we need to figure out how to win this game. Nobody else on the bench is able to lead the team, and so um, the coach can't tell one of the players on the bench, like, all right, so this is what you need to do. You just got to be way better at shooting and learn how to defend way better, and then go out there and do it. Look, that's not going to work. The other players going to be like, I'm still not too good. But the coach, back in the day, um, has anybody seen Tropic? No, oh shoot, what was it? It was a basketball movie with Jackie Moon in it. It's okay. Will Ferrell played. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, so back in the day, like when before sports were so super legit, and then the coaches were actually were able to be players. You had like the player coach kind of thing. So um, the idea is that a coach can't will a team to do anything. A coach could so God gave us free will, and so God can't make us do the things that He wants us to do, and especially God or we can't again save ourselves from sin. But the idea of the player coach is that the coach could be like, all right, my star player's down, mortally sinned, mortally wounded. I'm going to come in and save the day, and so that's kind of what Jesus did, but obviously in a way more profound way. Um, Maybe like the uh, the CEO of the organization was like, all right, I'm taking my tie off. Here we go. But so yeah, so again, uh, the one with the knowledge and with the power had to enter the game. And so again, like the coach or the owner or whoever couldn't just stand on the sidelines and use his headset to be like, all right, do this or that. He had to enter in. Another thing is that you know let's say there's somebody, or let's say America is uh, about to be taken over or something by another country, um, and you have somebody with um, an ability to save the country. Um, that person well, any president needs to be an American citizen, right? And so, um, in order for anybody to help save the country, as a president, they need to. Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't become president. He couldn't, save the day Terminator style. Uh, he had to. He was not. He didn't have the nature of a natural born citizen, and so likewise, God had to become a human citizen in order to save the world country. So also, this is a really nice uh, image of the cross. So this is an idea that like this is what Jesus saw um, from the cross. He didn't just see, you know, um, I guess theologically, uh, Jesus saw the entirety of the world. He was on top of the world, saving the world. Although he was just on a menial little hill in the Midi, Middle East. Uh, he was on top of the whole world. All right. Thirdly, God became man because in his infinite goodness, he wanted man to reach his created potential for good. Um, and so, again, like going back to Adam and Eve, we see that uh, um, we were made for greatness. We were made for total happiness. We were made uh, for total joy and peace and fulfillment. But obviously, as we're living our lives, we realize like, wow, I'm messing up all the time. I'm not as happy as I want to be. Things are falling apart. I can't even keep my house together. Whatever. Um, and we're realizing that in our brokenness, we're not living the life that God made for us. So there's two options for us. One option is to be like, all right, well, everything stinks and it's never going to change, and I'm just going to make the best of it, you know. And maybe in that view, um, if we're lucky, I'll just make enough money and protect, like build my own little empire so that I could be as happy as possible using all the things that I have. But even then, richest people in the world, miserable. No matter how much money you have, you're not going to solve your problems. And obviously, we can do a certain degree of helping ourselves out. We could get our life together, become more organized, be healthy, things like that. But ultimately, we're just going to mess everything up. Um, that's depressing. But that's option number one. But there's a way better option. So, second option is that uh, we can invite God into our lives um, to allow us to reach our potential, our greatest potential for good. And so, in order for that to be able to happen, um, God needs to become an intimate part of us. And so, when you look at all the stories of the Old Testament, you're probably slowly familiarizing yourself with those stories if you're not already very familiar. Um, we realize that the Old Testament is just a comedy show of just total depravity. God's like, "Hey, I'll throw you a lifeline," and then the Jewish people are like, "Oh, thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm going to forget about you in 3 days and worship another god." And then we're going to fall into despair. So, what a great story is Jonah. You know what? Story of Jonah. So Jonah is eaten by an animal. What animal? The whale. Yeah. So technically, it's a big fish, but maybe it's a whale. Who knows? Um, a whale makes sense because he might be able to breathe in there, but whatever. um, but like Jonah, the whole book of Jonah is just hilarious. It's just tragic humor where God's like, "Hey, Jonah, I want to give you this great plan," and Jonah's like, "No, it's too much effort." And then so Jonah's like, "I'm going to run away from God," and then he gets thrown off the boat because he's the reason the boat was about to sink, and then gets eaten by a whale. And then God saves him from the whale, and God's like, "Hey, can you do this thing that I originally wanted you to do, but then you ran away?" He's like, "Oh, if you really want me to." And then Jonah, he's supposed to preach to the Ninevites, who are non-believers, and tell them that to change their ways. So he just goes up to the Ninevite town. He's like, "All right, all you need to repent, and God's gonna kill you if you don't." And he just walks away. And he's like, "They're not gonna listen to me. I'm a random Jewish guy who has no authority." And then the Ninevites are so intense that even the cows are putting on sackcloth and ashes. The cows have ashes on their heads. It's really funny. And Jonah's like, "Oh my gosh!" They like the most incredible thing that could have happened. Jonah is wailing and lamenting because he didn't want these non-Jewish people to be saved. Like, oh, come on, this is the worst. So anyway, there's this whole series of things. And I think Jonah's a good image of us as just these like, um, yeah, just like petty and uh, just sometimes miserable people when we don't invite God into our lives. But that's like the whole Old Testament. Like all throughout the Old Testament, obviously there's great people um, that do pretty good, but the whole Old Testament is just God trying to save His beloved people, and then them messing up and screwing around. And so Jesus is the one who uh, was the only one who was able to come into the world and become one of us and become uh, in us. And so that's, again, as I mentioned, with baby Jesus, this uh, crazy phenomenon of God becoming this weak, lowly, um, uh, indefensible thing. That's the Eucharist. And so, likewise, um, our ability to become one with God is through receiving that weak, lowly, indefensible Eucharist, which is the person of Jesus. So when we receive God's grace and Eucharist and His love and dedicate our lives in faith and prayer, then we can reach our creative potential for good. And so that's why God became man. Number 4, God became man to show us His great love so that we would serve Him out of love instead of fear. And so I always love pictures of Jesus with little kids um, because, I mean, it's got to be, it's very telling that when Jesus was around, the little kids just came up and just like were hugging His legs and we're like, hey, Jesus. Because, like, again, Jesus is God, and God historically was always scary and mean and really intimidating, and rightfully so, because God, who is the perfection of everything, um, should be the harshest thing for us to look at, you know. So it's like God is the whitest of whites, and we're like, ugh, gosh, I can't even get a stain out of my white T-shirt, right? Um, But so anyway, the God who is so powerful and so incredible and should be this hulking, intimidating thing, um, actually became man to show us that God is truly love. That while God is all powerful, all knowing, all incredible, God is most uh, uh, fundamentally, God is all loving, and God is love. And so, um, one of the most tender realities of Jesus coming to the earth is just to show that He can love us, to like look into our eyes, to become a human so that we could gaze on Him and we could hug Him and hear His words and encounter Him. So again, it's really telling when a child comes up to somebody and just you know wants to embrace them because that child recognizes something good in that person, something warm and tender and lovable. And so that's who Jesus was. And so lastly, well, and in my little picking, not St. Thomas Aquinas, but lastly, I'd like to say that God became man to give us a perfect human example to follow. And so, um, you know, Jesus Jesus was perfect. Um, and so, in order for any of us to do anything perfectly, we need a good teacher. And so, um, whether it is work or a game or whatever, the teacher is always the one who's showing us how to do things. And so we look at like St. Albert and St. Thomas Aquinas. If St. Thomas Aquinas didn't have St. Albert, he would have had as brilliant of a mind as he did, but he wouldn't have had a teacher to allow him to raise to the capacity that he did, as St. Thomas Aquinas is like the one of the smartest men in the history of the world and the greatest theologians in the church. And so Jesus is that perfect example to follow. And this is just one nice image of a lot of Jesus and some saints in like heaven. But all throughout history, um, especially like I think in medieval history, there was a tradition of um, uh, benefactors, or well, number one, saints. So Jesus pictured with saints. So Jesus would like be bestowing something to a saint, or he'd be lifting a saint up, or whatever. But in the Middle Ages, it was for rich people. It was customary for them to be commissioned a painting of them, standing next to Jesus and like gazing at him, or like them in the Last Supper or something, because um, Jesus is and that kind of goes back to, um, our ability to reach our potential for good. But the way that we reach our potential for good is to, uh, number one, as we said, that invite Jesus into our lives, but to live his example. And so his example, first and foremost, is in the Bible. So we read these great stories of Jesus in the Bible. But the example of Jesus, I guess the most uh, beautiful thing about Catholic saints is that the Catholic saints are the closest embodiment to Jesus that we have since Jesus was on earth, and since other than the Eucharist. And so, yeah, saints are um, those examples of us who have been so configured to Jesus that um, they are more, yeah, again, the closest thing that we are to Jesus as a human being. Um, and so when we look at these saints, so again, when we're talking about Mary, Mary was the absolute closest human being uh, ever to be to Jesus Christ. To be biologically configured to Jesus, to hold him in her belly, to teach Jesus, the teacher, all these things. Mary, the reason why Mary is the greatest of the saints, the reason why Mary is able to pour so much grace of God upon us is because from her birth, and then from her birthing Jesus, um, she was just totally intertwined with Jesus Christ. But then we all throughout the history we see the saints. So I think when Christians throw out all of church history, number one, what they're throwing out is that they're throwing out the wisdom of these church fathers like Saint Nicholas, who are like showing us the way. Um, but also, when Christians throw out the examples of the saints throughout the history, then they're throwing out the lived uh, example of Jesus. So obviously, in the scriptures, we know that Jesus loved the poor, but throughout all of history, the saints showed us how to love the poor. Up through Mother Teresa, who, you think that uh, the Bible is all you need, but all throughout all church history, these saints are throwing out these quotes that are like, "Oh my gosh, that's like unbelievable! I can't live without the quote of Saint Francis or the Mother Teresa." But the reality is that our world is, and human life is so inexhaustible. Nope, not yet. Human life is so inexhaustible that each of these saints are highlighting a reality of the perfection of humanity, which is Jesus, in a way that nobody else can. And so our goal is, when we unify ourselves with Jesus, we can become we can be the most unique that we could ever be. So Jesus living in us can expand our own personality. So some people think that personality, uh, our personality dies when we get religious, because we're just conforming ourselves to some big, creed that is. Then we become boring, and we do all the same boring stuff that religious people do. But have you heard of Saint Carlo Acutis? Yeah. So he was a millennial, and he died young, and he's now a revered saint. Um, but he's a great saint because as a millennial, he relates to a lot of us in really powerful ways. And he said that I might butcher the quote, but he said, uh, "Without Jesus, we're just going to live our lives as lame photocopies." So without when we don't live in the fullness of Jesus, um, our life just becomes like this muted photocopy. Like those old photocopies when your teachers would just photocopy them from like 20 years ago. And it's just like gross and grainy. Like that's life without Jesus. Where it's like, oh, I guess I'll act like Brad Pitt. I guess I'm gonna pretend to be, like I don't know, so like my friend Kathy, who's really cool. Well, that's a boring photocopy. But when Jesus lives in us, we become like a profound, bright, brilliant original. And so, that's a really beautiful truth that the deeper we are in the life of Christ, the more original and profound and beautiful we are, like Jesus. So I just wanted to share another song, but this is I think it's definitely a Christian song, but it's a kind of a beautiful reflection on what Jesus did as Jesus became man. Mhm. Oh, that's not helping. Nope. Maybe I'll just unplug it. Well, So I thought that song was nice. Uh, yeah, I think the beauty of that song. I don't know if I've particularly heard much about Jesus swallowing. I think it's biblical, but Jesus swallowing up death. So that's a beautiful image. But yeah, Jesus swallows up death, wipes the tears from our faces, um, and I think it's a really encouraging reality for us to enter into that. Um, any of our pain or misery, any of our failings or struggles, um, they're just consumed by Jesus if we let them. So um, and most profoundly, that's true for like death, like real death. Um, it's true that Jesus has taken away the stranglehold of death in our life, but then death shows up in many different ways. But death shows up in any of our, yeah, again, faults and failings, any of our the ways that we get just caught up um, and distraught and uh, worked up and anything that's seems to be has a stranglehold in our life. Those things that are keeping us from our happiness. And so maybe the last thing I'll mention is that I uh, before well, yeah, maybe an hour and a half ago, I got a call to go to Mount Alverna because a woman had passed away, and the family wanted me to come and pray with them. And so I walk up, and then there's like two people, and then I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And it turns out I'm like, "Oh, there's more family and more family." So we go into this room, and then it's just filled with all these family members. And so then there's these little tiny kids that are trying to behave, even though they just want to like run around and play. Um, but uh, you know, obviously, for any family, that's a really so grandma passed away, and a pillar of the family, and uh, really hard for everyone to deal with. But without Jesus, like that is just the worst day of your life. Is your grandma or mother or your spouse dying? Um, but to recognize like that Jesus has transformed the whole idea of death. That obviously we're going to be sad in an earthly sense, or we're going to cry because we missed that person. But I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to encounter death without Jesus, without knowing that Jesus has accompanied us in baptism, has led us into this great life together. So that's why Jesus came. That's why God became man, to free us from death, to give us happiness, to give us an example, and just to give us His love. So thank you. And so now how about we spend a minute or two just discussing what um, what reason for God becoming man was most powerful or convincing to us. So just think of and talk at the tables of um, yeah, what reason of the incarnation is most powerful or convincing.